What I thought I would do tonight was to spend the next 40 minutes on selling you on why you should immediately go to x.ai, sign up for a trial, convert in 14 days, and hand me over $8. That's the purpose. Not really. So about 4 years ago, I teamed up with Matt on this idea that there might be a moment in time for where you could potentially remove the pain of setting up a meeting. It's not that setting up a meeting between you and I come next Wednesday is difficult. It's just that it's yet another chore of a lot of shit which I have to do in my job to do the exciting part. And it's certainly easy to imagine, but after 4 years in that basement, and I just looked at the pictures before walking up here, and I looked a whole lot younger just 4 years ago versus today, and didn't have any gray or anything. Looked almost happy, actually, just there for a second. And what I would do tonight then is at least talk about 5 learnings. So I won't sell you anything. I'll use our product as a backdrop, and then those 5 learnings, I'm sure some of you would just say, that's kind of obvious, or I knew that, or I would certainly not make any one of those mistakes. You must be kind of retarded, Dennis. And why did Matt team up with you? And for others of you, I think there'll be perhaps a nugget or 2 in here for where you can take a mental note, and when you go out and build your own intelligent agent, you might not have to make some of the same mistakes. Sounds good? Have anybody in here heard of x.ai before? Or show of hands? Oh, that's awesome. That makes me happy. I'll tell my wife you all said yes when I go home. Now, first, for those of you that didn't put up your hand, let me just give you the 30-second version of how the current intelligent agent kind of works, or certainly the space that we're in. So the space is one for where you shoot me an email saying, Dennis, you seem half clever. We should meet up for a Diet Coke. Do you got time at some point in the near future? And I can simply reply back to the very same email and say, yeah, I'm up for a Diet Coke. I have CC'd in Amy, so you can put something on my calendar first week of February for about half an hour on 200 Broadway. And the agent is now responsible for both understanding that the agent works for me, what I just asked it to do, it fully understood, remove me from the conversation, reach out to one or more participants, negotiate with them exactly when it would fit into their calendar, understand what's concluded, and upon conclusion, send out an invite. And again, it's not that you haven't heard this before, because you do it all the time, and most of you yourselves, unless you work at, say, Moody's or something like that, and you might have a human doing this for you. But for poor people like us, we're on our own. And of course, you can transfer this agent from email into a Slack setting, or even into settings that are not really kind of agent-like, and we'll talk about that as well. So that's what we do. We schedule meetings for a living. Side note, you try to hire 30 engineers on the idea that they should schedule more meetings. That is fucking hard. As in, that takes real effort, I tell you. Now, number 1, do not pretend to be a human. And again, it is one of those things, right, where, sure, Dennis, we would never do that. I'm not so sure. I can tell you that it's kind of semi-sexy to run 1,000 Turing tests a day and actually win some of them. As in, you can get a lot of engineers and data scientists really excited about winning, 300 tests every day. As in, that's not too shabby. But take a step back and at least allow yourself to imagine. So if I do win one of these tests, as in I've somehow fooled another human being into believing that my agent is really a human agent, what have you really won? Outside of a little bit of tech joy, what did you really win? And that is probably going to be a whole lot more difficult for you to really argue for something tangible won. But what have you lost if you try to fool them and they either catch on, or even if you do fool them and they now have a different level of expectation in the next step in the dialogue? And somehow that was not as obvious, certainly on day 1. But what I'm not saying here is you can go ahead and humanize your agent, which is not the same as trying to pretend that you're human, or trying to fool the receiver into believing that this might be a human. I'll give you just one example here. So this is from 2016, and certainly early on, I'm not so sure that I immediately saw the kind of negative effects that comes along with playing this set of Turing tests. So what you see here is some investor, and obviously I only love Matt, but this was another investor that kind of emailed me and wrote back, "Hey Amy," or the assistant of the investor, "Hey Amy, thanks much for organizing the call with Dennis. It was super productive. Our managing partner," probably shouldn't have said his name here, "Ravi, I'm not HIPAA compliant, would kindly request if access could be granted to him to test out x.ai. Could you please check with Dennis if that would be possible?" That's crazy talk. As in, you can't build any AI that can kind of decipher this sentence and kind of take action on it. But that's because we somehow crafted an agent at that moment in time, certainly back in 2016, for where it was not immediately obvious, certainly to this individual, that this was a machine. She just assumed that, oh, okay, I can write up some sort of response and Amy will kind of take action on it. So whenever you might even win one of those, you almost immediately lose. So don't do that. Now, how can you combat this idea? There's 100 tactics we can kind of talk about, but I certainly think that certain traditional UI elements from prior paradigms that you kind of learned, whether that be the mobile UI or the desktop UI, or even the command line, just by injecting them, you're kind of suggesting that this is a piece of software. And I'll be happy to kind of talk about all of the things that we've done to tell a story about us not being human, but us being a machine, and still keeping the idea of the dialogue intact. Now, second one, dialogue is not the only UI. And again, it is so easy to fall in love with a new UI paradigm because they don't come along that often, as in, I'm getting old, or old this. So at 46, if I go back and have some memory of when I took my CS degree, which I did on the command line, then we haven't really had that many UI paradigms, right? As in, I took a degree on the command line, my mom kind of got introduced to compute through the graphical user interface, my kids kind of got introduced through some sort of mobile UI, which is probably a distinct UI in its own right, and now we have suddenly the idea of the conversational UI, which I would suggest is a distinct UI in its own right. But I think certainly what happened when we started 4 years ago is that given it comes along so rarely, you really lean into it, as in you fall in love hard. And somehow you want to solve all the world's problem within that distinct UI. And you know what? There's plenty of things that can be solved well within new UI paradigms, as in, I certainly want my Google Maps on my phone, and it's certainly way more powerful than having on my desktop. I don't want to sit and edit my pictures on my phone. I'd much rather have that on my desktop. Ask some of my infrastructure engineers, they're probably going to spin up a new instance on Amazon through the command line. So there's certainly a reason for each one of the prior UI paradigms, and many things will carry over from one to the other. But we lean so heavily into one of them. And that is just certainly not right for us, but rarely correct for any application where I think it is likely that you'll cross UI paradigms. Just like I love my Alexa. I think it's a nifty little device. I'm not sure about the whole thing, recording everything that goes on in my bedroom, but that's for a separate chat. But you know what? Screaming to your telly that you wanted to kind of increase the volume is actually not a good UI. My remote is just way more powerful. Does mean that doing search on the remote, which is super shitty on the Apple TV, their voice is kind of pretty powerful, right? So I think you'll have to accept that you have to cross paradigms. Now, here's one way to kind of cross paradigms. So instead of me kind of writing out half paragraphs, little love letters on when Dennis might be available, I could also really just display it in some sort of matrix. I could also just make it clickable. I don't have you to write back to me saying, next Wednesday at 1 with Dennis is okay, and I'll come down to 200 Broadway. If that is what was suggested, you can just click yes. And sometimes that is the better UI. And that is certainly what we've seen. And you can take that even further, where perhaps the best thing for certain answers is to even send them to a destination. And that is where I was personally kind of almost reluctant on day one to give up on this idea. Actually, so much so that we initially implemented it against the idea that you would set your preferences over the conversational UI. Like, I really like meetings on Monday, I come in a little bit late, I need to leave early on Fridays, got to pick up the kids, and a whole long idea of kind of writing that out. That's not really what you want. You probably want a couple of sliders to kind of tell me when you're available to do meetings. Now, even on Slack, we kind of figured out when we need to carry it out of the Slack conversation and into other UIs, whether that be web UIs or email. Now, third one, do not over-index on language, right? Language is just not a solved science, and if you do anything with intelligent agents, you're certainly trying to decipher some set of unstructured text that arrives, and it's very easy to just lean into that heavily. As in, you raise $10 from Matt, should be so lucky, and then you figure out you'll spend $7 on them on trying to kind of solve language. I'm not so sure that is the right distribution. Doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of some understanding of some corner of the language universe, but I'm not sure you should over-index on that. And I certainly believe that we might have done so in the early days, and I would much rather try to figure out of the $10 which I might have in bank, how do I best invest them? For us, perhaps one of the better investments is to have some sort of reasoning engine. As in, even if I do understand your reply back to me for where, hey, Dennis, I'm running 5 minutes late. Seems about honest and fair. Happens sadly in most of our meetings, right? But if you run 5 minutes late and I actually do understand it, what action do I take? Could be I take no action. What if you're running 20 minutes late? Then I might have to take some action. And I think there's probably even more value in whatever agent that you go engineer to over-invest in the reasoning engine. Because the input itself, you can kind of simplify that in the early days and certainly become more and more ambitious on how unstructured you're willing to kind of take that in. 4, and this might just be the more important one. Incorrect predictions are fatal. That is not true in all systems. So there's plenty of recommendation systems, right, for where whatever recommendation you make or whatever prediction you can come up with is of value. So you upload some picture to Facebook, and at this very moment, they were able to pick out 3 faces out of 5, some 60% accuracy. In any other setting, that is probably rather shitty. Certainly, if you're a self-driving car, that means you hit 2 pedestrians in the first 10 meters, and that wouldn't work. But there's a system here for where they're almost kind of reverse, right? For where there's some recommendations engines where whatever you do for me is something which I don't have to do myself. So that is Facebook saying, those 3 you don't have to tag if that's what you want. You do have to tag the 2 remaining faces in that picture. But in other systems, certainly systems like this, you can't design for some setting for where you rely on the prediction, because there's no setting for where you can run at 100% accuracy, and there's systems for where there's no prize for getting it almost right. As in, there is no self-driving car in the kind of near future running at 92% accuracy. It only hits 11 pedestrians a day, which is not too shabby. It's good software, but it's just not commercially viable, I would guess. Here, though, we don't get any points for almost setting up the meeting. If I ask Amy to set up a meeting between you and I, we either meet or we don't meet. There's nothing in between. And that, I think, was not, again, immediately clear. So you need to design for a system where if you make a prediction, even if it is of low accuracy, you should make sure that it counts as some sort of value, not one where you judge by the amount of predictions that you get wrong. And that is something where you have to figure out how to kind of reverse that. Now, plenty of little things that we've done here. You can do readbacks, as in this is what I understood. You kind of go correct me if you think I didn't do a good prediction. But certainly what we're moving towards is that, and this is a basic example, at this very juncture in the dialogue, I don't want to rely on my own prediction. I want you to tell me how to go forward. So somehow I was not able to do what you asked me to do. Now you tell me whether you want me to kind of go find the next available time. Do you want me to try for the same kind of week that I asked for? Or should I kind of just stop scheduling this meeting? So we have these kind of decision points where we start to involve the host, which is obviously the best prediction engine you can get, because he knows what he wants, our customer. But that is very interesting. And I'm not even suggesting I fully figure it out, but I think we're quite close. Now, finally, price your agent as software. And you would say, yeah, we priced it at $19.39, $199, some price for where it doesn't even resemble a human being at $50K cost in Manhattan. That's not my point. My point is that we certainly saw in our pricing here that in a prior setting, given that these are intelligent agents and they kind of mimic or participate in processes that humans would otherwise have done themselves, that the idea of picking who gets access to it, if not at the right price, becomes a little bit odd. So we would sign up Nike or VMware or Electronic Arts, and I would be super happy about it. But then we started to see that, they became very selective about who do we get access to this particular agent. Because in the olden days, I would only give a human assistant to these select VPs. And that kind of carried over until we found the right price point for where there was kind of a shift. It's just software, so you can just give it to people willy-nilly? Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. And that was certainly an interesting kind of hunt here. And it was not Zero, by the way. Zero didn't work for us. Certainly, I wasn't yet able to figure out what Zero looks like. There's probably some version of it, but it was not Zero for us. But it was not $39 or $59 either. That was 5 inputs, very rapidly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe talk a little bit about, I guess you added a lot of new features in October a few months ago. What does that look like, and what is the experience now? And you alluded to some of this in the talk, but
it is very hard to educate people on the conversational UIs. Any one of you who's got some Amazon Alexa device will see that every 10 days they'll send you a long email suggesting you can do these 50 things. Why? Because we haven't figured out how to use them yet. So what we launched back late last year was a whole kind of host of other ways to remove the scheduling pain. Sometimes, say you're meeting up, you actually don't want to hand that over to an assistant. You just want to say, go pick something on my calendar, but still with the very same preferences that I've learned over time. So go find a time here. Or you might have a meeting on your calendar that I didn't set up for you, but I still need to kind of reschedule it because I'm running late. I should have some link in that event so you could immediately just click that and have it rescheduled using the preferences that you set up. So we started to kind of figure out what does that other UI look like and how do you kind of mix that with the agent. And it worked. I'm biased, but it really worked well. We've almost doubled our retention in that effort just over the last kind of 3 months.
a much lower price as well, right, as you alluded to.
Yeah. Money is always good to increase retention.
Great. All right. Do we have one question over there?
Hi, thanks. Very interesting. I'm wondering what your experience is when there are more than two parties involved, your agent and another party, setting up a meeting. It's a third person or also a fourth person. How do they interact with it? How do the dynamics change when there's an agent, a computer agent in that process?
So let me first describe the perfect scenario, certainly what I'm running towards. You shoot me an email saying, hey Dennis, we should meet up for a Diet Coke. I reply back saying, that sounds awesome, I've seized it in Amy. You then reply back saying, oh, great, I've seized it in Andrew on my end, he can hash it out with Amy. But what if Andrew is Amy? Who the hell is she talking to? And that turns into really some sort of network effect for where we don't need to talk to anybody, and it becomes a preference negotiation where we can instantly set the meeting. And that type of network effect we can create almost immediately if we go inside the organization. So if you run a 70-man band, you can start to use this on Slack and just say, hey, / Amy, set something up tomorrow afternoon for me and the product design team for half an hour. And she'll figure out exactly when to do that. It'll be 3:30 in meeting room 9F, looking at your resources. So that's awesome. That's kind of where we are headed. Now, when you introduce this agent and you have a multi-participant meeting, it's really no different, certainly as we see it, to you having introduced yourself, some assistant, some coordinator. It certainly becomes more complex given the fact that you have to negotiate with more people. And it's less a tech challenge and perhaps more of a social challenge. And as in, how would you social engineer for the 5 of us to meet next week? Because there's actually no overlap in the calendar. And somebody will need to kind of surrender.
All right, one more.
So I think any venture you do, you should fall in love with the pain and not the solution. So I'm in love with the pain of scheduling meetings and would solve it by whatever means possible. And if that is me shining out the window, I'll just do that till I die. Or if that is through some communication back and forth over email or some web UI or some link, that's all good to me. I certainly think we just fell in love with the conversational UI a little bit too hard, too early, because it certainly was fucking sexy, to be honest. And I think of the changes of late that have really kind of aligned us, I think, with the expectation of the customer as well.
All right, there's one last one here.
Have you explored any other revenue channels, like models as a service or product integration with the other calendar apps?
I would very much like for this to be a utility that is so good that you're willing to pay me a few dollars for it. Or I'm not overly fond of trying to extract value elsewhere, say through mining the data or the dialogue or through some commission on some set of services. I think you should go sign up, connect your Zoom account, connect your G Suite, connect your Slack account, and be very well aware of the fact that I'm not trying to do that because I have a commission deal with Slack. I'm doing it because I'm here to service you in managing your meetings. Kind of like you would expect the $10 you send to Dropbox to really be to store your files and not anything else. So we really focus on just making the utility good, so good that I can squeeze a few dollars out of you.
On this note, thank you so much, Dennis.